Welcome to Catch Outdoors, presented by the Waypoint Podcast Network at waypointtv.com. I'm your host, Captain Rob Modes, reporting to listeners each and every week from the fabulous Florida Keys. This podcast is centered around the great outdoors, includes topics on fishing, boating, beaching, bicycling, hiking, camping, and most anything else related to spending some time outside of your house or office. That's a good place to be. So kick back for the next 40 minutes or so and get a taste of my Florida. This week's episode is number 81. The fishing learning curve. That just sort of popped into my head because it's been that way since August for me and Key Largo. But first, some announcements. Hey, buy my books. I still got some copies on hand you can order. They're signed while cleaning out the garage. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I discovered a few signed copies in a box I'd forgotten about. So get them while you can, or you can go online to catchoutdoors.com and get you a copy or two there. They're not signed there. So if you want a signed copy, you're going to have to go to catchoutdoors.com and order it on there. And there's a little sale going on right now on two of the books. So check it out. Fishing report. Got to go out to the reef again. Yeah, but combine that with searching out some very interesting inshore locations at the same time. So kind of a dual trip at the beginning of the week. Up until this most recent outing, I've been taking the South Channel out of Largo Sound through Pennicamp Park on out to the Atlantic. So basically you leave our ramp and you head south in Largo Sound, which is not a very big body of water. Just imagine something about half the size of Estero Bay. And on the far, it's more like a southwestern end of it, you run into a channel that leads out of Pennicamp Park and runs out to the Atlantic. And that's the way I've been going. Kind of easy, well marked. The only problem is big dive boats go out of there, so you really have to watch out for the slosh. But it puts you in an extremely good area on the Atlantic. Well, I decided to finally go the opposite way. I've seen it on the charts ever since we moved here back in August. But quite frankly, I didn't take the kayak there. It's just too far to go. Now that I have a power boat, that's a whole different ballgame. So I thought, well, I'm going to give this a try. Wow, I'm glad I did. This is more like the classic mangrove waterways that you see in the Everglades and the 10,000 Island area, as a matter of fact. Beautiful. Lots of cuts off of the main water. Lots of little channels to explore off to the sides, either side of this thing, and it's in no man's land. I mean, there ain't nothing there. It's all part of the Park Service. Both Pennicamp and I'm going to say the Dagny Johnson too borders this thing. So a lot of this is all protected. The crocodile area. It's really neat. So I'm going to spend more time in there, especially on the windy days. I've now got a whole new place to go look at. It's beautiful. I just like the cuts. I like it when you go through a waterway and you have these left and right little cuts that go to who knows where. And it'll be special on those 20-mile-an-hour wind days. Yeah, man. I'm hoping to get back to that creek soon. I followed the creek on out to the Atlantic, made my way to a couple of new spots on the Patch Reefs that I hadn't fished before. Had a great day. Brought home some fresh fish for dinner. Snapper, white grunts, and porgies. Let me say this. Porgies good. I've caught grunts before, but grunts are a pain to clean. You don't get much off of them unless you get a really big one. Now, you will get some nice ones in the Atlantic, but I just soon toss them back. Of course, keep snapper if they're legal because they're freaking delicious. But porgy's really, really good. I haven't eaten that many of them. It's kind of like a sheep's head, kind of shaped in the way of a sheep's head and cleans that way and has a nice thick piece of white meat on each side and delicious. Cooks up really nice. So, I've had all kinds of snapper and all kinds of snapper available out here in this water, but it's nice to know that you can go for something really easy if you're just looking for dinner. And I'd highly recommend it. It reminds me of sheep's head. Good. Also, I'm getting to be a bit of a conservationist, so it's like I don't try to fill up a freezer, and I'm not going to fill a cooler with fish on a day. I'm going to get what I can eat and then put the rest back. Unless it changes my mind. If you catch a bunch of fish, you get a big grouper. Well, obviously I'm going to keep a grouper and the fish and make 2 days out of it, or 3. But quite honestly, it's just, this will be good for Janelle and me. That's all we really need. So, yeah, don't fill those coolers up. Put them back, y'all. Put back the fish so you can catch them again. Easter Sunday, which was yesterday, I'm recording this on Monday, I hit the reef again after a brief letdown in the winds. It blew like a son of a gun last week. I got that trip in, I think that was Monday, a week ago. And then it blew Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and half of Saturday. It was crazy here. I mean, blew. So it's all that weather that was really nasty up in the Midwest and the plains and the South with the tornadoes and all. It just sucked the wind out of the South down here, I guess, to energize those storms. And it was blowing off the water like you would not believe. So it finally let down. And I got out, again, I went to the reef. It was beautiful on Easter Sunday morning. I'm like, okay, I know where I'm going. And I just couldn't believe the clarity of the water out there. 40 feet of water, you could see the bottom. You could see all the relief in the bottom. You could see the rock piles and the reef piles. And geez, it was crazy. And man, oh man, did I catch fish. Let's see here. I got a pad here I wrote down. I've got a pad here I wrote down the species on. You ready for this? Red-eye snapper. I've only seen those in cases of ice and for dinner at some restaurants. Caught one. Yellowtail snapper, parrotfish, barjacks, strawberry grouper, red grouper, ocean triggerfish. Let's see, white grunt, wrasse, and Spanish mackerel. That was a list of the different, several of each except for the red grouper. The red grouper, whoa, what a disappointment. I mentioned grouper. Okay, this thing comes up. It's legal. It's beautiful. That's what it is. And it's closed till April 30th. So it's like, hi, nice to see you. I know where you are. I might try to come back and get you later. So he got released. But it was really amazing. The parrotfish were interesting. The barjacks, I haven't caught barjacks in ages. Those things are speed demons and a lot of fun on hook and line, obviously. So anyway, quite a few species and quite a few different things lurking out there. I've added some stuff to the list, so in my ways of going about this, I picked up live shrimp this time. I really haven't taken the time to do that. I'm keeping frozen shrimp in the freezer here, along with a chum block, and I'll do that. But this time I thought I'm going to swing by the marina across the way. Actually, it's a bait shop across the way, Pete's Bait Shop, and pick up some shrimp. So I did, and I'll be doing that again, to say the least. Okay. Hey, listen, I preach live shrimp. I do. I tell people, get it. And for some reason, I don't know, I got a case of the lazies. And the frozen shrimp was working pretty well, but it certainly wasn't catching all the species that I caught yesterday. So this is going to tie in nicely to today's podcast, episode 81, the fishing learning curve. So as I mentioned last week, I've been fishing for over 60 years, since 1959 to be exact. It's kind of frightening. This was the first time I went fishing with my dad, 1959. Took me to a small pier, what used to be actually a bridge in Clearwater. They built a new bridge out to Clearwater Beach and took the old bridge down and left a piece of it so you could fish off of it. And it was great. But to this day, I'm still learning. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated by fishing. If you think you know it, you don't. If you think you know it, those fish will absolutely mess with you on the next time out. You find the honey hole and you go, man, this is a spot. This is, it can't get any better than this. And you go back like the same time, same place, same moon, same, wind direction, tides, and you skunk. And you're like, what in the world? It's because fish know more about it than you do. That's all, and they always will. And they know where the food is. They know what they want to eat, and you don't. And the trick is figuring that out, figuring out those patterns. And so I always tell people I'm always learning. So, and down here it's particularly true. We're always learning. I'm always learning about birds and butterflies and plants and trees and flowers. I moved down here to the Keys. I had very, very little knowledge of the plants down here other than orchids. I know people have orchids around here and a lot of native plants here, but I really didn't know as much as I thought I knew about Florida plants because they're different everywhere. And so anyway, I'm always learning. As most of you know, I wrote this book called What I Know About Fishing Southwest Florida. And specifically the waters from Charlotte Harbor south to the upper 10,000 islands. And writing that book was honestly pretty easy, but only because I had spent so much time on the water up until writing the book. So it was like, I don't know, that's just a lifetime, really, almost, if you count Clearwater. Then coming south and being a guide down south for years, you're on the water. Well, I was on the water every day, pretty much. In a lifetime, I also spent a lot of time in Florida Bay, down here in the Keys, thanks to the fact that Jonelle and I kept a boat, a 17-foot skiff, down here in Islamorada back in the middle to late 90s. That was a fun learning experience, especially with navigation. Charts and compass and no GPSs at that time. And even the first ones had only lat-long entry numbers in them and no track. Basically what you did is you picked up this little device that was about the size of a flip phone, and you punched in the numbers as best you could, GPS, if you could find them. That was the other trick. Most places didn't have GPS listing numbers. It was all Loran back then. And none of those little gadgets took Loran. Some programs would let you transfer Loran to GPS. So that was very entertaining. And then what you did is a lot of dead reckoning. You pick out something on a shoreline and you head for it. Now, that can be real tricky in Florida Bay. Why? Because everything looks the same until you get used to it. Every single little island looks identical until you've been out there several times. Then you start to recognize passages and places and islands. But it was quite, as I said, it was quite the learning curve. I used to drive the boat. Jonelle sat on the cooler seat with a chart in her lap. She's a pretty good navigator, by the way. So that's how we found our way across the bay. So now I begin again, and I already have observations to pass along. I mean, I certainly don't know everything about fishing the Florida Keys, and I really don't think anyone does. Well, maybe George Poveromo. I have to give him credit. He's fished all of the Keys at one time or another, and not many can say that. Heck, keep in mind, the islands of the Keys stretch for 125 miles. I mean, I can go through a bunch of names, Flip Pallet and that bunch, Chica Fernandez and all that, but they've all fished locales typical to, say, around Islamorada or Upper Florida Bay, but not, for example, not ever in Key West or around Key West unless they were invited by friends or something. So I guess George is about the only one I can really pick on and say, yeah, he probably has fished. I mean, heck, I think his father lived up here in Key Largo. So he fished up here as a kid. He fished Miami, and he fished all the way down to Key West, and his television show takes him all up and down the Florida Keys. So I'd have to say he's one of the few. If you can think of another, let me know. That's what email's for. But that's the one that pops into my head. And again, 125 miles of a string of islands. Now, you add to that the amount of water on either side, and you get some perspective of how big all of this is. So don't get me wrong, there might be a few more, but most are like me. They've spent a great deal of time in an area that's close to where they either grew up, live, or keep a boat. And that's pretty much the way it is down here. So Key Largo was a mystery to me just 8 months ago. But I'm starting to unravel some of the mystery of fishing these new unexplored waters, and I love it. I'm ready to pass along some of what I've learned, and I thought that's what this podcast would be today. I thought I'm just going to pass along some of the little tidbits that I've managed to gather out of this, which might not only help you if you come to the area here, or any of the Florida Keys for that matter. You can start putting 2 and 2 together and get 4 instead of 5 and see if you can't figure out something. Just give you a little head start. I guess that's what I'm looking for here, is just a little head start. So first, there's more focus here on both inside and outside of this area than I experienced in Islamorada. The people that fish down there with skiffs, flats boats, center consoles of, say, 18 feet, 19 feet long, pretty much stuck to the inside. You didn't see or hear about very many people going out, even on the prettiest days. If it was a pretty day, they went inside. And there's a reason for that. On the inside, your visibility is really good on the calm. You can see fish move, you can see bait scatter on the surface, and you can most certainly see tarpon roll. And so that's my theory, because that's how we focused Islamorada. We had a boat that was perfectly capable of going out front on the best days, but we just didn't do it. Rarely. We did it a couple times. We went out and we caught dolphin, mahi-mahi on the edge one time. The water was beautiful out there. We went snorkeling a few times off the boat. We went diving at Hen and Chickens. So it's not like we didn't go out there, but it wasn't really a fishing location. It wasn't something we geared on. We came down here during the 90s. We loaded the boat off. We took the boat off the trailer, put it in the water, and took off into the backcountry and fished all the way up to Flamingo and Cape Sable and all those there. I mean, we covered all of Florida Bay on that end of Florida Bay. When we went to Marathon, we fished the inside. I can't remember ever going out in Marathon. I don't think we did. And we never did, and we never fished Key West. So that's how it was. This area is a little different from the residents and the people who live here. They do both, and they do it in whatever boat they own. If it's a single engine center console like mine, 18 feet long, they do it. I saw a boat yesterday on the reef that could not have been more than 14 feet long with a dude in it and an outboard. Probably took him all morning to get out there. I saw 2 jet skis come out and fish. I fished in 27 feet of water. I relocated in closer on the reef, so I was about maybe 5.5, 6 miles out on the Patch Reef, and I watched these 2 jet skis come. And of course, your first thought is jet skis. Oh no! But no, they were very courteous. They came up, they slowed down, they went down the reef from me, and they turned around backwards on their jet skis and started fishing on the pocket reefs, on the little pocket holes, the bomb holes, I call them out there, the white sand holes. I was like, man, that's impressive as hell. So my point should be well taken that just about anybody that recreates on the water here does both. And on the beautiful days when the water's calm, they come out. They go out. You don't see them in the backcountry. You go in the backcountry on a calm day, you'll have it all to yourself, which is also very cool. But that's the first thing I learned. 18-footers in the Atlantic are okay. You just want it to be calm. And I got to be honest with you. It's pretty damn fishy out there. Seriously, you stop on a patch reef, carefully anchor on sand. Them's the rules. Do not anchor on coral or rock bottom. You drop a shrimp or a live pilcher and wham, you get hit. I mean, yes, it is that easy. And if it doesn't if it doesn't get eaten in like 3 to 5 minutes, just move. Just move. And move 100 feet. I'm not kidding you. On the same patchy area, just move off about 100 feet in any one of the 4 directions, and boom, the fish are on. And then you mark the spot and hang in there with it. I'm very lucky. I added a trolling motor to the boat when I bought it. That's one of those spot lock Minn Kotas. Well, I think it's called the Travola. I think that's what they call it. That thing is awesome. It allows you to basically just turn it off, turn the motor on. I don't even use the trolling motor to move the boat on the reef. I don't want to waste the batteries because I'm using it for the lockdown for the anchor. But shut the little motor off, leave it in, and very slowly just move over to the next spot and watch my depth finder and find the next rocky patch on the bottom. Wow, you can see it out there. All you got to do is stand up and look. You go over like this sand bottom, and then all of a sudden you see this dark underwater. You keep going, and you realize, oh, there it is. There's more rocks. And I set the spot lock on the trolling motor and turn around, put bait down, and bam. It almost never, ever doesn't get hit. Whatever I drop down there, within a minute or two, you start to feel a bite. And if you don't feel a bite, it's a full-on grab it. Sometimes they grab it on the way down as it's dropping to the bottom. Fishing in anywhere from about 22 feet was the minimum, and I didn't do well there. It got really good in 27, out to about 40, and then it stops unless you're willing to go out off the drop-off. Go out to 60, 70, 80 feet of water, which, by the way, all of that's within about a mile of each other. It's not like... Yeah, I've already said this. It ain't like the West Coast where I had to fish off of Fort Myers and go 50 miles out to get to 100 and something feet. It's crazy how fast it drops off here. So anyway, if it doesn't work on the first drop, just move a little bit. Now, what you feed them does matter, and I kind of learned that the hard way. The first baits I put in the water were frozen shrimp because I just bought it at Publix. And I bought it at the park. The park's Pennicamp Park sells bait. By the way, a little tidbit for boaters, they do not sell fuel. They have fuel, but it's for their guide boats and their diving and snorkel boats. So make sure you fuel up, because there's not many places on the west, what am I calling it? The south side of the Key Largo area where you can actually buy gas on water. So keep that in mind when you're coming down. So anyway, the shrimp that I had, the frozen shrimp I had, which by the way, Penny Camps was nicer than Publix. The Publix kind of looked old. I've also bought it at a couple of the bait shops here, and most of those are it's really good. It's in good condition. But I learned a lesson, man. I was right about what I said about fish and shrimp, frozen shrimp up on the West Coast. I just don't do it because there you're going to pick up all the trash fish. When you put it in the water, you're going to get nothing but puffers and cats, and you might get the occasional redfish if you place it in the right place. But most of the West Coast fish are going to avoid frozen. I also took out some frozen scaled sardines. They work a little better. But once they start to thaw, they get real soft, so they just fall off the hook. Of course, so does frozen shrimp. I think that was it. I never tried squid, although I did squid on the west coast of Florida, but I haven't tried it here. I understand if you're going to fish for stuff like grunts and porgies and things like that, it's good to have because they can't pull the bait off. And that makes sense. I also used artificials. They work well for Spanish mackerel and jacks. You got to rip it through the water, and something made of metal is a good idea with a tiny bit of wire in front of it, unless you want to get it cut off. One thing I have not seen out there in the 4 trips I think I've taken out there now are barracuda. I don't know where they hide. Well, I know where they hide out in the back, but they certainly don't seem to be out there in the open water. I have seen them snorkeling on the reefs. So it's the oddest thing that I haven't caught one out there, which is something I catch, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of when I'm fishing in the backcountry areas. So, most recent trip, I added live shrimp. This is the learning curve part. And suddenly the fish and species caught jumped dramatically. So there was my learning lesson. There's a bait shop right across from us, Pete's Bait Shop, and I went over there in the morning right before I left and got a bucket of shrimp and brought it back, put it on the boat, and took that out there. Man, oh man. Let me tell you what, yellowtail love fresh shrimp. They are not very fond of frozen, but they love fresh shrimp. And you can break it. You don't need to put the whole thing on there. Put the head, the middle, and the tail, and you're still going to do better than I was doing with frozen shrimp. Then came the chum bag. Yep. Now, I've seen it. I've heard about it. People on the West Coast, a friend of mine, Kevin Bellington, who fishes offshore or did fish offshore. He's retired now. I think he does boat orientation and move boats around now. But when he was fishing out in the deep water of the Gulf, he would always tell me about chum bags. Everybody had a chum bag. Put it down, shake it around, get the stuff going, and bring those yellowtail up off the bottom. Well, I don't know. I just didn't think about it. I had it in the freezer. For like 2 months. I'd bought one and just stuck it in the freezer. So I got it out yesterday, and I took it and put it in my super duper special chum net, and put the chum bag, I should say, put it over, and yep, guess what? There were different schools of everything behind it, but it's pretty cool. The first thing that showed up was ballyhoo by the hundreds. I don't throw nets anymore, but if I had, I'd have had a whole well full of ballyhoo. Other stuff, yellowtail, of course, showed up. Other small fish that I couldn't recognize, bar jacks. I also had a really nice, there were several fish that showed up behind me. The trigger fish, I think, was probably the nicest. This big old trigger came by, so I just put a little shrimp on a hook and tossed it in his face, and he took it. He will now be dinner. A big one. I hope if any of you out there ever cleaned a triggerfish? Boy, that's a pain. I remember now sadly how badly it was when somebody would catch one over on the West Coast. But anyway, I did, and they're delicious if you haven't ever had it. That was one I kept. I kept that and a couple grunts, and I kept one Spanish mackerel. I like to do light fried Spanish mackerel as hors d'oeuvres with a little bit of lemon on top. Yum, yum. And cook it fresh. Don't freeze Spanish mackerel. You're not going to be happy when you thaw it. So anyway, the chum bag made a huge difference. So I could start sight fishing fish with shrimp and artificials or even flies. It's like just pick out what's out there and just aim at it and go for it. And that was the best. No doubt about it. Fishing equipment also was somewhat of a learning curve for the outside. Bigger reels, stronger rods, but not too big and not too strong. I've learned that, going out there with the monster stuff is really for the guys that are going out to 200, 300 feet of water. The guys that are trolling in the insane areas where they are going to catch something huge. That's not what I'm aiming for in an 18-foot boat. And I know my limitations. But having a bigger reel, definitely, because you can put larger line on it and it's more substantial, I guess is a word for it. And having a little heavier rod, like a heavy spin rod, 6.5, 7 feet long, with a little oomph down in the butt, down where it really matters, makes a big, big difference. Larger size leaders and hooks and line and weights. Wow, weights were a mystery to me. Weights are something I've never really had to use. I mean, honestly, think about that. When you fish backcountry, what do you use as a weight? A jig head. You might even use a weighted offset hook, but that's about it. The rest of the time, you're pretty much going to just be free lining stuff out of there or free lining a lure. And that's not so out front. Out front, you got to start playing the weight game. I was using a weight. Okay, here's how I had it rigged, which is pretty much wrong. I had a hook on the bottom, right? A little farther up would be a weight, usually like a grouper knocker rig, with the barrel weight. I don't know, about 8-9 inches above the hook. And I was also using a way to lock that down so it wouldn't slide up and down, because I noticed when the weight was down by the hook, the fish didn't seem to care about it. They can see too well here. So I was trying to avoid that. Well, it didn't work very well, because what happens is if the weight does get down to the bottom first, the line floats up in the air and then winds around the standing line, winds around your fishing line. So obviously nothing's going to eat it then. And if they do, you ain't going to get it in because something's going to break. So I started tying my own dropper rigs. Yes, like everybody else, I went on YouTube and I'm like, okay, somebody show me the simplest way to do a dropper rig. And there's a guy on there that did. And I thought, man, this is fascinating. So I sat down one afternoon this week and I tied up several dropper rigs to take out there. What's a dropper rig? It's pretty simple. The weight goes on the bottom. So you have the weight hooked to a swivel on the bottom, a hook swivel. And then about halfway up the line, or you can do two of them, you tie droppers off to the side. And you can use the same. There's a tricky way to do a knot system, but you can actually just basically fold the line up and make an ear off of it. On either side, if you want to, you can do it twice. And on that ear, you loop that through a hook. So you have an unweighted hook sticking off the side of the line, kind of like a sabiki rig, if you know what those are. And you drop it down. That puts the weight solidly on the bottom and causes the bait to float above it, however many inches you've put it above the bottom weight. Worked great. It really did. But not for everything. There was some finesse going on yesterday. The water was so daggone clear, it was almost like the fish could see it. And they're like, I'm not going to bite that thing. Are you crazy? And so I had to mess around with different stuff. And I eventually rigged up a second lightweight rod. So what I did on that rod is you put a small 2/0 hook. I put a split shot above it about 8 inches, and the split shot was light. So, split shots are weighted backwards. So a number 2 is heavy and a number 10 or 12 is extremely light. It's another one of those fishing things I'll never understand. But so I would say I had about a number 4 or 5 on it. It wasn't the heaviest in the world, maybe an eighth of an ounce, but just enough to get it down into the current so it kind of waved in the breeze. Well, that did it. That got the fish that were being really, really shy and the ones that were nibbling and running on the bottom rig bait. And I started catching the yellowtail. I caught the red-eye snapper, the mackerel, Spanish mackerel. He loved that, of course, because it was floating in mid-water. So things like that worked a lot better by switching up. That also applies to fishing line. The line itself can be too thick. Some of these fish are line shy. So you try to do your best with leader, but so for it's a fine line, but no pun intended. I can't believe I said that. At certain times on the patch reef, it's too big, and the yellowtail and the other snapper, they aren't likely to even bother with it. Too small, and you can be sure the grouper from hell is going to bite it. That happened to me yesterday, and I can't believe I got that big red grouper in the boat. And I was kind of bummed because he was legal, and it's April, and they're not open. Red grouper down here in the Keys is not open until May 1st. So anyway, he got the reprieve. I know where he is, though. I know where to find him. I've also learned how to tie those droppers, like I said, so that really helped. But I know what I was doing wrong to start with. I know my rig was backwards, and so that was a big learning curve. That was a big. I'm glad that I was able to figure that out, but it wasn't always exactly right for the fishing situation. So, which I thought, oh, this will just cure it. I'll be able to put a dropper rig down there and I'll catch all kinds of fish. Well, I sort of did, but I certainly didn't catch everything I wanted to catch until I switched to lighter line, lighter rod, which of course at that point I caught the grouper. What else down there? Oh, using your eyes. Oh my gosh. This is something I preach for backcountry fishing anywhere. Use your eyes. Plays a huge part in reef fishing, as does the same in backwater. Look for birds. Oh, absolutely look for birds. Diving birds, holy cow, something's going on there. You can be sure of it. And it's probably mahi underneath. If you're really lucky, wahoo or sailfish, something is driving the bait up to the surface. And the birds come down to pick off what's there. And it's usually the terns and frigate birds, kind of a combination of both. You see birds, you should go. It's plain and simple. And also look for weird pushes in the water. In other words, little things that don't look right out there. Even though you're seeing waves and a little bit of chop sometimes, there's going to be this situation where you see something that just doesn't look right after you've gotten used to sitting out there for an hour or so. It's like, wait, that's weird. And that's probably some big fish moving under, or a big school of fish moving. Flashes of light on sunny days. You will see these underwater flashes out here off the Atlantic because the water is so daggone clear that if it's a fish and he's got, he's silvery in color, most of them are, and they move, the sunlight hits them, and you're going to see these weird flashes. You're like, what was that? And that's probably fish, so you want to keep your eyes open for that as well. I've preached this in the past, and I'll preach it again. Get you a good pair of sunglasses. Yes, it's expensive, but it's worth it. It's just one of those things you kind of have to have. Yeah, it's, get a good neck chain, put that on them. But it's really weird because here you're going to need two pair. Oh, I know. Here we go. Out in the offshore waters, blue lenses work the best for cutting the glare and seeing down into seawater, the ocean water. And green or amber work better in the back than the blue ones do. So if you do what we do here, as I have found out in Key Largo, where they fish both, you're going to need two pairs of quality polarized sunglasses. And they're not cheap. I know they're not cheap, but it's worth it. So put them on a neck chain, keep them clean. Something I do when I get back with my sunglasses, I rinse them just like the boat. I rinse them with fresh water just to make sure that they are they're not going to get salty in the hinges and things like that. Although good glasses generally, they pretty much protect the whole thing from that kind of stuff. But you just need to be aware that might be something you need to do. But yeah, it's a double investment, but honestly, it's worth it. Now let's do some backwater a little bit. Holy moly, there's a lot of backwater. Yeah, back there. A good portion of it's very shallow and unmarked. The ocean side has all kinds of chart information warning you about pop-up reefs so you can avoid them, thanks to the National Marine Sanctuary. Not so much in the back. Pay attention. Drive standing up, watching the water carefully until you establish routes in the backcountry and things that are safe passage. That's probably one of the biggest things about the learning curve part of this is that when you're in the backcountry of any new area, anything can get you on the bottom, especially here. I'm specifically talking about here. I know it's the same thing on the West Coast because I've seen people aground in the Estero Bay, Pine Island Sound, and those areas. Matlacha Pass. Oh my gosh, Matlacha Pass is a real trouble if you run aground there. It's mostly oysters, so not good for the boat. So anyway, down here it's the same way. You have little tiny patch areas of rock, sand, mud. Heck, you might be going well off of an island and you think, well, there's a mangrove island, should be clear over here. It's not. Another one's building up right underneath you. You look down, you go, oh my gosh, because by the way, you can see the bottom. So be aware of that. And GPSs, while they are helpful, don't show everything. I mean, I've found variances between every different model. And let me tell you what, because of my guiding time, I used a lot of different GPS and bottom finders. Some are right and some are wrong and some are halfway in between. That's just the way it is. You need to understand that the GPS is only as good as the data that's fed into it. And And if you look at some charts that are the datum, as they call it, that goes into the GPS, it could be dated late 90s and early 2000s. It hasn't been changed since then. And Lord knows, after a big storm, all kinds of stuff changes in shallow water, especially in the backcountries. And here's the good news. Finding fish is pretty much the same as when I fished the west coast of Florida, down here in Florida Bay. Again, use your eye, but also look for the likely strike points. You know, the edges of mangrove, the points where water is moving around it. Snook and redfish. I mean, that's pretty much what I focus on when I'm out in the back, when I'm cruising around mangrove edges. That's the two I'm really looking for. Anything else is good. I don't mind getting a mangrove snapper or two, or any other fish that happens. Big sharks. I mean, we get some big lemons and hammerheads, black tips, reef sharks. We get all kinds of crazy stuff in the back. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of fun. But again, you know, use your eye and watch where you're going. The only big difference in the backcountry here is the clarity of water. If you run too close to an area, even with a trolling motor, fish will be flushed out and disappear. That wasn't so much the case. It happens, of course, on the west coast of Florida, where most of my long-time fishing experience is. But down here, that water's really, really clear. And if you come nosing in too close to an edge or something, you're just going to spook them out, and they're not going to return until you're gone. Where are the fish? Here's the problem. They can be anywhere. And the patterns are much more difficult to discern here in Florida Bay in the Keys. There's so much water, hundreds and hundreds of thousands and thousands of acres of water in Florida Bay. So they can be anywhere. And it's all relatively the same depth. That's even crazier. You know, a majority of it's 3 to 4 feet deep, the whole daggone thing. Then you mix in the shallows that I was talking about. But there are spots where they go on low water. So this is a key element of the learning curve that I've gone through here off the Key Largo area. Low water is better than high water, plain and simple. That's not always true when I was fishing Pine Island Sound and Matlacha and Estero Bay. High water could still get you fish. You just had to fish off the island a little bit. You might have to use a stinky bait like cut ladyfish or something to draw the fish out. It does not work here. These fish, when the water goes low, however, go to the deepest cuts they can find, which ain't very deep. So for example, let's say you got 3 or 4 feet at high tide, and at low tide you got a couple of feet of water. It doesn't usually drop more than 1.5 feet or 2 feet. But then you're going to have these little swales, and these swales are like underwater rivers. It's where the tide literally passes through so many times it's made a slight cutout. That's where they go. They sit in these things, and these things can be miles long. I'm not kidding you, not 100 feet, not miles long. And that's where the fish go on low tide. So the best fishing in the backcountry around Key Largo, and for that matter, it was the same in Islamorada, is on the low. When you get out there and you get out there on that low tide, you know where they're going to be. They're going to be where the boat floats, pretty much. And so you just kind of keep that in mind, and you'd be surprised at how much better you're going to do with that. Well, obviously, it's going to lead to understanding the tides again. Yeah, tides are important. I've said this a million times. Tides are really important. So I found that fishing on either side of that low is best, as I've said. And so, if you're out on the flats and there's just this huge open area and the water's up, probably not good. Water's down. They concentrate on these cuts that I'm talking about, and there you will find the trout, permit, bonefish, and all the others that you hadn't found on the high tide days, or if you did, you found it by sheer luck with a school moving across an open flat. So it's those little small rivers. Sounds simple, right? It isn't, because remember what I said about the lack of markers for depth in the back bays? You really got to be careful with the navigation. Baits. Here's what I've learned about baits. In the backcountry, live shrimp works. Always has, always will. Scaled sardines, also known as pilchards, whitebait, and shiners, they all work well. The mostly, though, when hunting for big snook in the bushes, mangrove shorelines. I don't throw a net anymore. I'm too old. My back won't let me. So I really do rely heavily on shrimp, live shrimp in the back. but also artificials work great. So don't shun artificials. In Florida Keys fishing in the islands back here, water's clear. If you pick the right artificial, they're going to eat it. You just need something that's natural looking. It has to look like a bait. You can go fish bright red ones and blue ones and green ones if you want to, but to be honest with you, anything that looks like a bait will probably work, provided it's in the same size range. Fishing a real big bait, hoping for a big fish on the open flats here is going to be a little tough. You want to at least get it down to the size of the bait that you're seeing in the water. One of my favorites is made by Z-Man. Anything made by Z-Man. Z-Man uses a special soft plastic that floats. It's got air in it. It's got air cells in it. And it works because it doesn't sink in this real shallow water unless you add an offset hook with a weight on it or something really, really, really small to the front of the hook. For example, a tiny split shot, something to get it down in the water column. There are other baits. I've used DOA cowls. I've used a lot of others, and they work. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the Z-Man does not have the problem with going to the bottom when you stop reeling. So that's, something to definitely consider. And their paddle tails are great, man. They cause a commotion behind them that gets most fish attention. So remember that. Dark versus light artificials don't seem to matter quite as much in the waters of Florida Bay off Key Largo. I don't know why that is. White gets it just as much as brown, dark red, or dark green on any given day, sunny, cloudy, whatever. It goes against every rule that I've ever heard of or taught myself on the west coast of Florida. So throw what you like, but there is one thing that's absolutely important. Practice your casting because location. I believe that's what they say in home sales, right? Well, in the backcountry fishing in the Keys, it's the same, but I say it this way: placement. These fish are grazers and they're opportunistic. And if you throw a bait too far from them, and too far can be 3 feet, they won't do it. They might see it, they might hear it, but they are intent on chasing whatever's in front of them down in that grass. Could be crabs, could be anything. You need to land a bait almost on their nose. And if you do that, it will get eaten. I've seen it happen every single time. You drop a bait 3-4 inches off the nose of a big snook feeding in those troughs, reds, sea trout, whatever you happen to, they will eat it right away. So practice on your placement. Now, just for a second here, we'll put the fun back in fishing. One of the greatest things about fishing in the backcountry of the Florida Keys, I don't care where you are, whether you're in Key Largo all the way down to Key West, it's just beautiful. It's something that you're not going to see anywhere else in Florida. It's the water's clear and beautiful. The fish are amazing. The birds are amazing. It's worth the trip if you haven't been and if you've never done it. And once you do, you'll probably become totally addicted. I am so glad I'm back. It's been years. The last time I had really, really hit the Keys really, really hard was all the way back in 1999. And then my life took me to the west coast of Florida, and I became a guide there. And I'm not sorry I did it. It was a lot of fun. And I grew up in Clearwater, so I was more familiar with that type of fishing. But I really, really missed fishing the backcountry off of Islamorada. And now this Key Largo thing has opened up a whole new learning curve for me, and I'm excited about that. Fishing has never really been boring for me, but now it's like exciting again. I'm going in the back, I'm learning stuff, I'm paying attention, I'm getting better back there each time I go, and now I've got the ocean to play with too, and that for me is really, really exciting. Before I sign off, thank you all for the notes. Got some really good questions coming in via email and text. Keep them coming. It gives me ideas for doing these podcasts. And yes, rumor has it I'm working on that book number 4. Like I said before, it's got to be done. Or it was, somebody's got to do it. I guess it's me. More about this as we move towards summer. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today. My podcasts are scheduled for each and every Tuesday. If you enjoyed listening, please tell a friend, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Catch Outdoors is presented by the Waypoint Podcast Network and is available on Waypoint and many of your favorite podcast providers. Facebook page is Catch Outdoors. The websites are catchoutdoors.com and waypointtv.com. Until next time, get outdoors and enjoy.